LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 26th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. I will be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News for what should be, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. You'd think I'd have that totally memorized, but it always seems to go somewhere wrong. Well, whatever. Anyway, you can see the big topic that was the big topic of all the Sunday morning news shows that I'm covering. It was the Prigozhin Putsch puts Putin in peril. I got all alliterative. I was just going to do Putin in peril, but other people did that, but nobody came up with Prigozhin Putsch puts Putin in peril. And it's all about this band of mercenaries, like 30,000 mercenaries who are controlled by this Russian oligarch named Yevgeny Prigozhin. And he started this march. He took over a southern city in Russia. He marched on Moscow. I'm going to show you how all the Sunday morning news analysis shows covered it. They all thought it was like the biggest story in a long time in Russia. It's certainly the biggest threat to Putin's power in his entire, 20 plus years as the leader of Russia. And pretty much everyone agreed it was the biggest story, well, except for my political comedy here, which was from Fox and Friends Sunday morning or Fox and Friends weekend. They had on Maria Bartiromo, who does the Sunday morning future shows right after, or Sunday mornings with Maria Bartiromo or whatever. She was trying to promote her show over on Fox and Friends, and she didn't think that was the biggest story. She actually spent a lot of time talking about why she was devoting her entire show to Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was really the biggest story. And Pete Hegseth, one of the hosts of Fox and Friends, who in my mind is famous for once telling all of his viewers that he never washes his hands because he doesn't believe in germs. Well, he asked Maria Bartiromo if the Hunter Biden story would break through, and got the response that you can see over here.
I think it breaks through, Maria.
Yeah.
You're covering it. We're covering it, rightfully so. Does it break through and become a real problem?
The White House wanted to give the media something else to cover. And this is the MO. This is exactly the way they do things. In fact, on Friday, I said, wow, what a blockbuster WhatsApp message. I'm sure there will be an enormous story over the weekend that the White House is going to be pushing to take this story off of the front page. And sure enough, we've got the State Department drumming up all the drama that took place over the weekend in Russia. So I don't know if it's going to break through. The mainstream media has an excuse again not to cover it. They're covering everything about Russia and the Wagner Group.
Yeah, it's true.
As if it really matters to the U.S. right now.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned the taxes with Hunter.
As if it really matters to the U.S. The State Department's drumming up this story. And like I said, even Fox News Sunday didn't agree with Maria Bartiromo's analysis there. And I'm going to show you all five of the big five outlets concentrated on this as the main story, pretty much the top story. Gave it a lot of coverage. I'm going to show you the news summaries from longest to shortest, starting with, I think actually maybe CNN State of the Union had the best news summary because they actually had someone in Moscow. While I was watching the story break over the weekend, CNN seemed to have some of the story like half an hour before everybody else. And I think it may be because they just have more connections with like this guy in Moscow, or better reporting, or just more resources, or I don't know. You can let me know what you think. Like I said, I'm gonna start with ABC, which was pretty good. They have Jon Karl and Ian Pannell talking about what's going on. You'll see the story from all the different angles, starting with ABC from yesterday over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, confusion and unease in Russia and around the world after a brazen challenge to Vladimir Putin and a betrayal from one of his closest and most ruthless allies. President Biden is at Camp David this morning with his national security advisor. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has canceled a trip to the Middle East. And the Secretary of State has had urgent consultations over the weekend with our allies in Europe and Asia. It began Friday when mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin publicly revolted against Russia's military leadership and ordered the Wagner Group, his notorious private army that's been fighting in Ukraine, to march on Moscow. Prigozhin appeared to quickly take control of at least one major city and an important military command center on the road to the Russian capital. Putin accused Prigozhin, a catering business magnate often called Putin's chef, of treason, and he ordered the Russian military to crush the revolt, raising the specter of a civil war breaking out on the streets of Moscow. Hours later, it all seemed to be over. Prigozhin ordered his troops to stand down, and after Putin called Prigozhin a traitor, the Kremlin said charges were dropped and the mercenary leader would relocate to Belarus. This morning, Vladimir Putin remains in control of Russia, and the rebel who challenged him remains a free man. Whether that uneasy truce holds is unknown, but this much is certain: Putin's iron grip on Russia is now in doubt. What does it all mean for the war in Ukraine, for the Russian people, and for the world? Martha Raddatz is standing by, and we'll get the latest from the Secretary of State in a moment. But we begin with ABC's chief foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, near the Russian border in Ukraine. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, John. And what an extraordinary series of events. Totally unthinkable just 2 days ago when Putin looked unassailable. But then Yevgeny Prigozhin, a longtime Putin ally, dispatched his armed mercenaries from the Wagner private military company around the world, fighting and securing business interests for Russia. Most recently, instrumental in some of the fighting in Ukraine. But Prigozhin's relationship with Russia's senior military leadership soured to the point when he suddenly declared an armed revolt late on Friday. He marched his troops back across the border into Russia, taking over Rostov-on-Don with apparent ease, his men securing defense and intelligence buildings, as well as an airport in the city. Rostov-on-Don is a key military hub. And then after seizing control, he ordered his tanks and military vehicles north towards Moscow, a major oil depot exploding on the outskirts of Voronezh as Wagner troops advanced. Videos also showing military helicopters being fired on by Wagner forces as a long column of Chechen forces moved in to try and side with Vladimir Putin and clash with Wagner. An angry Vladimir Putin addressing the nation, saying he'd been stabbed in the back, warning of civil war. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, Prigozhin announcing a halt, saying he wanted to avoid bloodshed and ordering his troops to withdraw to base, with Wagner troops then being hugged and cheered by local residents as they finally pulled back. Extraordinary. John?
Ian, what do we know about the deal that was made between Putin and Prigozhin? I mean, is Vladimir Putin, after calling him a traitor, really going to let Prigozhin get away with his life?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. There's a telephone conversation you would have liked to have been part of. I mean, we don't know the precise details, other than Russian claims that the president of neighboring Belarus brokered a deal allowing Prigozhin to go to Minsk and, as you say, granting amnesty for him and his men. I mean, it remains to be seen how much value can be placed on those guarantees, given Russia's and Putin's track record of eliminating critics and dissidents. But I suspect we haven't heard the last of Prigozhin. I mean, Putin certainly appears humiliated and weakened. And frankly, after years of looking invincible, there are now serious questions about how long he can stay in power. Indeed, how much power he actually continues to wield.
And what does it mean on the ground in Ukraine? I mean, is your sense from the Ukrainian officials you're talking to that they can take advantage of this?
I mean, they certainly thought so. I mean, had this gone on longer, it certainly would have benefited the Ukrainians more. I spoke to President Zelensky's senior advisor. This was before the climb down, while the crisis was really at its peak. And what he told me was that there were discussions within the inner circle inside Kiev about how to press the ongoing counteroffensive even harder, while there was this disarray and discord within the Russian military. So if the Russians are able to regroup, even without the help of those Wagner troops who've been so instrumental, then expect the going to still be very slow. But interestingly, the Ukrainians have been predicting that the war in Ukraine would spill over into Russia for some time. And in the words of the advisor Mikhailo Podolyak, this could well be the beginning of the end of the war. John?
Ian, Pannell in Ukraine, thank you. Joining us now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Mr.
Oh, and I will have two clips of Anthony Blinken, not from ABC's This Week. Anthony Blinken went on all the four actual news shows. He skipped Fox News Sunday. I don't know if he was invited on Fox News Sunday, but he was on all four of the news shows. I'm going to compare some of the information that Dana Bash got out of him on CNN to the information that Margaret Brennan got out of him on CBS News' Face the Nation. I think Margaret Brennan actually did a better job. And that was a pretty good report, although Ian Pannell was in Kharkiv near the Russian border, so still in Ukraine, and that's why he was talking about like what his sources in Ukraine were telling him, while Matthew Chance over on CNN State of the Union talking to Dana Bash here is actually in Moscow, and I don't know if it's the best story. It seems like the most insider account, but you can let me know what you think after we watch that news summary along and juxtapose it to the other four news summaries. We watch all five news summaries. That's what we do, and then we talk about them. So let's look at the CNN State of the Union one together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering what's next. The city of Moscow appears no longer under immediate threat this morning. A mercenary leader who turned against the Kremlin said he was pulling his forces back after getting as close as 120 miles outside of Russia's capital city. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the ruthless leader of the Wagner private military group, will not face criminal charges and will be allowed to travel to Belarus. That's according to the Kremlin, after he called off what Russian President Vladimir Putin said was an armed uprising. But the incident called into serious question Putin's authority after Prigozhin and his forces were able to seize key military facilities in the south and posed the most serious threat to Putin's grip in all of his 23 years leading Russia, a nuclear power that stumbled badly in its unprovoked war on Ukraine. I want to get straight to Moscow and CNN senior international correspondent, and want to ask just about what you're seeing as our eyes and ears on the ground inside Russia.
Well, I mean, it's been remarkable because at the last minute of this deal was done to avert a crisis, as Wagner's forces were approaching within a couple of hundred miles or so from the outskirts of the Russian capital, that defences had been built to protect Moscow. Roads had been dug up to slow the advance of the Wagner armoured column, and everybody was anticipating there was going to be a clash, there was going to be bloodshed, and obviously that caused a great degree of anxiety and of nervousness. But as I say, that crisis was averted, a deal was done, and there's a huge sort of outpouring of relief, I think, within people inside Moscow that this didn't go further. I think what's interesting, though, is what comes next. And the images we're seeing on the screen now are from the southern Russian city of Rostov. It's got a population of more than 1 million people. And basically, Wagner took over that city virtually unopposed. And these are images of them leaving. But a lot of people from Rostov have come out and they're applauding Wagner, they're chanting Wagner, 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 they're showing their support. And these will be very disturbing scenes from the Kremlin to see how actually popular this incursion, this rebellion, this attempted coup, as it's been described by some Russian officials, by Wagner and its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, was amongst many parts of the population. Because his condemnation of the way the war has been conducted in Ukraine did definitely touch a popular nerve amongst ordinary Russians. They may not express it publicly normally, but this sort of rebellion caused people, at least in those areas, to come out and to show their sympathy for what he said he was trying to do. So relief that the bloodshed was averted, but some anxiety too, Dana, about what comes next.
I'm sure. Thank you so much. Fascinating report, Matthew. And U.S. intelligence officials believe Prigozhin had been planning a major challenge to Russia's military leadership for quite some time and briefed top leaders in Congress just this past week. That's according to sources who have briefed CNN. But the speed at which the situation unfolded this weekend caught them off guard. Here with me now is Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Thank you.
And I will have a clip of Antony Blinken talking to Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union. But one other thing I wanted to bring up about these 5 news summaries that we watched 2 of the 5 now. And I saw, finally got some comments going in the live comments. Noel said that Prigozhin said recently it was not a coup, but a sort of demonstration. And that's actually one of the things I found interesting going through these news summaries from yesterday is even, this is sort of like a slowly developing news story where we don't really understand everything that was actually happening it takes days to sometimes figure it out. And there are like several things that you'll see reported in all these news summaries that today seem to not really be true. Like, well, no one has said that Prigozhin is actually in Belarus, in Minsk. That hasn't been confirmed, although maybe that's going to happen. The march now, Prigozhin made a statement this morning saying that he never wanted to do a coup or overthrow the Russian government. It was a march for justice to show the weakness of the Russian Defense Ministry and the regular Russian army, and he was protesting the fact that the Wagner Group, the 25 or 30,000 fighters under his control, were going to be folded into the regular army and put under the Ministry of Defense. And there was some reporting you'll see that part of the deal was that some defense ministry officials would be fired, but that was doesn't seem to be true. At least it hasn't been confirmed by any actual facts on the ground. And it was all you'll see also reported that supposedly Prigozhin and the Wagner Group forces are getting amnesty, like no prosecution. But Putin came out and made a statement today that there would be prosecution for it seemed like he was trying to separate the leadership of the Wagner Group from the 25 to 30,000 fighters they control, and like telling the fighters they should either sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense or go home. I think I watched the whole thing. And so there are like all sorts of things that supposedly were in this agreement that now have been called into question by 24 hours of more news reporting. And so I appreciate the live comments for reminding me to point that out. And now I'm going to go to the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, where it's Margaret Brennan and then Ian Lee, who is also in Ukraine, in Dnipro, for the third news summary to juxtapose with the other, the 1 of 5. But here's Face the Nation.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. There is a lot we don't know yet about the motivations behind and the consequences following Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin's actions in Russia this weekend. What we do know about what one senior administration official calls a very bizarre episode is that there seems to be a pause, at least for now, due to a truce struck between Vladimir Putin and Prigozhin that was brokered by the president of Belarus, a Putin ally. The terms of that deal are still emerging, but even after Prigozhin abruptly stopped his march to Moscow yesterday, there remains trepidation about the risks ahead on this unpredictable path for Russia, which holds the world's largest nuclear arsenal. CBS News correspondent Ian Lee reports from Dnipro, Ukraine.
Rarely do failed mutineers receive a hero's departure. But residents cheered Wagner's soldiers as they left the Russian city of Rostov late last night. "Come back alive and take care of yourselves," shouted people in the crowd. The mercenary group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, smiled and posed for selfies on his way out. Some greeted the returning Russian authorities less warmly, with jeers and insults. For 24 hours, the world watched Wagner forces inch closer to Moscow. Updates of their advance splashed across social media. The Russian military secured the capital, soldiers deployed on the streets, and heavy equipment ripped up roads leading to the city. Prigozhin launched his mutiny after accusing the Russian military of killing his men in Ukraine with a missile strike, a claim Russian defense officials denied. His men quickly seized Rostov, home of Russia's southern military headquarters, before advancing toward Moscow. On Russian state TV, President Vladimir Putin accused Prigozhin of treason, though he never mentioned his name, and called for unity. We will protect our people and country from any threats, including internal betrayal, said Putin. And what we're facing is precisely betrayal. And with Wagner troops just 124 miles from Moscow, the Kremlin spokesman announced a deal. Wagner troops would be pardoned and returned to their bases. Criminal charges against Prigozhin would be dropped, and he'd go into exile in Belarus, whose leader brokered the agreement. This morning, an uneasy calm settled on Moscow. Life in Rostov also returned to normal. Putin's hold on power survived, battered and bruised, but not all may be forgiven. In a 2018 interview, Putin told a state TV reporter there's one thing he can never forgive. Betrayal, he said. Russia continued airstrikes on several cities here in Ukraine, while Kiev took advantage of the chaos to launch major assaults. But it'll take time to see what effect this mutiny has on the war. Margaret?
Ian Lee in Ukraine, thank you. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is one of the many top Biden administration officials who's been monitoring the events of the last 2 days, and he joins us.
And I will have a clip there of the Margaret Brennan interview with Secretary Blinken. I also want to point out in the live comments, I saw a Grumpy Cat. I should have made this criticism. This is from, I was talking about Matthew Chance, CNN, how he had like all this insider information about being in Moscow, but I don't know, maybe he got spun somehow, because he did say at one point in his report, as Grumpy Cat is pointing out, he said that there was relief that the bloodshed was averted, but I don't know, maybe he was talking about like actual civil war or whatever, but as Grumpy Cat pointed out, there are apparently like a bunch of helicopters and a fixed-wing aircraft that were shot down by the Wagner Group, so bloodshed was not completely averted. On that CBS News Face the Nation news summary, I mean, I thought it also good. I mean, all three of them are, I think, good compared to this one from Fox News Sunday. They have their reporter Greg Palkot, which has a special place in my heart, Greg Palkot, because if you look down in the video description under sources, you can watch my very first LiberalViewer video that was a little over 2 minutes long. It was featuring reporting by Greg Palkot in, I think, am I about to start it? No, let me start. Featuring the reporting of Greg Palkot in Lebanon. It was called Fox News Tries to Make the News in Lebanon. Reporter Greg Palkot in my video from July 20th, 2006. July 20th, 2006 was my first LiberalViewer video featuring Greg Palkot. And here Greg Palkot is still around. He's reporting from Kiev, not from Moscow. And the Fox News Sunday news summary is actually not that bad. It's, there's a lot of news reported. The one thing I would say is they kind of stress the chaos and instability. Like maybe this is something we can blame on Biden. I don't know. Am I like reading that subtext into it? You can let me know what you think after you watch Shannon Bream and Greg Palkot do their 3 minutes on the top news story. Not Maria Bartiromo's top news story. This isn't Hunter Biden. They actually did talk about Hunter Biden later in the program, but I didn't take any clips of that. But here they are reporting on the big story of the week on Fox News Sunday. Over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. World leaders are only just beginning to analyze the fallout after a rogue group of Russian mercenaries challenged Vladimir Putin. Those mercenaries, who had been fighting alongside Russia in Ukraine, accused Moscow of a deadly strike on their troops. The group then began advancing on the Russian capital as the world watched. But ultimately, they retreated. President Biden has been briefed by advisors, and all of this is unfolding in a country where there's very little press freedom. But we will bring you what we know this morning. In a moment, Senator Ben Cardin of the Foreign Relations Committee joins me to talk about how the U.S. should respond. But first, we turn to Greg Palkot, who's live in Kiev with more on what happened and what it means for Ukraine's plans to beat back Russian forces. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Shannon. Yeah, it's the morning the day after, and it looks like we're back from the brink in Russia, but it also looks like there's a lot of damage and a lot more questions. It was the biggest challenge to Russian President Vladimir Putin in more than 2 decades of rule, an attempted armed uprising. The man responsible, the Wagner Group mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin. He had complained about the war, Russian military leadership and conduct, then pulled his fighters out of Ukraine and into the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, where, with little trouble, he took charge. Then he sent his forces towards Moscow. The Kremlin braced for an attack, Vladimir Putin branding the actions treason. As Washington Watch has now reported, U.S. intelligence had earlier suspected something at least was afoot. It reportedly took Belarus President Lukashenko on authority of Putin, speaking with Prigozhin to cool things down. The Wagner chief pulling his forces back to their camps in Ukraine in exchange for guarantee of security. We still don't have confirmation of the Wagner movements. Prigozhin was supposedly to be sent to Belarus, his demands for Russian defense reform unaddressed, some of his mercenary army to be absorbed by the Russian military. During all of this here in Ukraine, officials and a lot of others watching as well. President Zelensky said it was a sign of chaos and instability in Russia, taking advantage of the confusion across the border. Kiev launched new inroads into Russian front lines all in the past 24 hours. Shannon, the big loser, according to most today, is really Vladimir Putin. Hired fighters running rampant, a mercenary boss criticizing your war plans. Not a good look for a man supposedly in control. Maybe that is why State TV is running, reportedly, a pre-taped interview with Putin today in which he says he's confident in the special military operation. That's what he calls the war here. Confidence, no doubt, shaken by this weekend's events. Shannon.
Greg Palkot reporting live from Kiev. Greg, thank you very much. Joining me now, Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of the Foreign Relations.
And I actually will have a clip of that Ben Cardin interview, which I will criticize because it, I'll explain why I'm criticizing when I get to that clip. I'm almost there. I only have 2 more news summaries. That Fox News Sunday news summary was not as bad as a lot of weeks where, especially when they're talking about domestic politics, that's when they really put their thumb on the scales in favor of the Republican Party. But I think there was a little, like I said before I showed the clip, that they're trying to play up the instability and chaos. They had a quote from Vladimir Zelensky about that. But, at one point, Greg Palkot said the big loser in this is, and it was Vladimir Putin. It wasn't Joe Biden. Like on one of the bad weeks, the big loser would be Joe Biden. But I guess you got to go back to Fox and Friends weekend for that kind of spin. But I'm going to finish up the news summaries here. The final one, the shortest one, is actually Meet the Press. Chuck Todd did not have a foreign reporter, as part of his news summary. He just did his own little news summary, a little over 2 minutes long here. And the one thing I thought about this news summary, the other ones gave somewhat of a biography of Yevgeny Prigozhin, but I think the best bio was in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, even though it's the shortest of the news summaries, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. It has been a head-spinning 24 hours as Vladimir Putin has seen the most significant threat to his power since he took leadership nearly a quarter century ago. The mutiny by the head of the mercenary militia, the Wagner Group, comes at a pivotal moment in the war in Ukraine, and it raises questions about Putin's hold on power in Russia. Is he a lame duck? On Saturday, Yevgeny Prigozhin ordered his mercenaries to halt a march onto Moscow and retreat to field camps in Ukraine after claiming to seize several military facilities, including the Southern Military District headquarters in the southern city of Rostov-on-Don. That's the equivalent of a rogue army taking over CENTCOM in Tampa, a U.S. military operations center, and then marching onto the Pentagon. Now, Putin had promised to crush this armed mutiny, and he accused Prigozhin of treason. Prigozhin accused Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu of starting the Ukraine war and then denying Wagner fighters ammunition. Prigozhin's forces drove to within 200 miles from Moscow, and then as quickly as this crisis erupted, it ended. And shockingly, it wasn't Putin, the strong man, who announced the deal, and the fact that it was a deal, but Belarus, Russia's ally, which offered Prigozhin amnesty in the country. We don't know if he's there yet. Notably, Putin blamed internal turmoil. He didn't do a rant against the West for this, for what he called a stab in the back, underscoring how weak he appeared. Prigozhin, also known as Putin's chef for owning a chain of restaurants that were a Putin hangout before he got to power, was responsible for sowing disinformation in the 2016 U.S. election as the founder of the Internet Research Agency. And then it was in 2014 that Prigozhin founded the mercenary army known as the Wagner Group, which has been recruiting Russian convicts to fight in Ukraine to prop up a struggling Russian military. So this Russian mutiny has raised a number of questions about Russia's resolve to continue to fight a war in Ukraine that Putin was supposed to easily win. On Saturday, Ukraine's President Zelensky said that Russia's weakness is obvious.
The world saw that the bosses of Russia do not control anything. Nothing at all. Complete chaos.
And joining me now is the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.
And yeah, that was the shortest of the news summaries. Like I said, I thought that was a good bio. They had some other good biographical information about Prigozhin and other news summaries. I don't know why Chuck Todd didn't include a reporter. They have, like, Richard Engel has been doing some good reporting, but I don't know why they didn't have him on Meet the Press or whatever. They just didn't include that. So that's definitely negative for that news summary. We've watched all 5 of them. We've juxtaposed them all. You can, like, tell me in the comment section which one you think did it best. I was kind of leaning towards CNN until Grumpy Cat pointed out that thing that they said that people were relieved that bloodshed was averted, or maybe if he said that more bloodshed had been averted, would have been more accurate, but I don't know. Now I don't even know which is the best one, so you have to let me know which one you think was the best news summary. And I am going to show you 2 different interviews with Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State. They're not the whole interviews. Down in the video description under sources, I have links to the sources of all these clips, and so you can watch the entire interview yourself. I thought Dana Bash did sort of more like a direct exam. You know, I used to be a trial lawyer, so I think of things in terms of direct exam, where you like ask your friendly witness questions that like get them to open up, and she basically just gets his talking points he was prepared to get, while Margaret Brennan over on CBS News' Face the Nation asks some tougher questions, more cross-examination, and gets him to address subjects that I don't think came out on the CNN interview. But I'm going to show both these clips. They're both about 4 minutes long, and you can tell me which one you think is better after we watch them, starting with CNN's State of the Union and Dana Bash asking Antony Blinken questions about what happened and why. That's like an open-ended question to get him giving his talking points. If top military officials were replaced, I was saying earlier that was one of the terms of the deal that doesn't seem to have happened. And then how weak is Putin? They're all kind of like almost softball questions. Certainly the first one is, and I'll talk about that interview and the next clip of an Antony Blinken interview after we watch this first one together over here.
This march within 120 miles of Moscow, Prigozhin then abruptly stopped, turned around yesterday afternoon. What happened? Why?
Dana, we don't have full information, obviously, and it's too soon to tell exactly where this is going to go. And I suspect that this is a moving picture, and we haven't seen the last act yet. But we can say this. First of all, what we've seen is extraordinary, and I think you've seen cracks emerge that weren't there before. First, in having Prigozhin raise front and center, questioning the very premises of the Russian aggression against Ukraine to begin with. the argument that somehow Ukraine or NATO posed a threat to Russia, and a direct challenge to Putin himself. So think about it this way. 16 months ago, Russian forces were on the doorstep of Kiev, Ukraine, thinking they were going to take the city in a matter of days, erase the country from the map. Now, they had to be focused on defending Moscow, Russia's capital, against mercenaries of Putin's own making. So this raises lots of profound questions that will be answered, I think, in the days and weeks ahead.
I understand this is very much a moving and a fluid situation. One thing that Senator Marco Rubio said, he's, of course, a top Republican on the Intelligence Committee, he says that top military officials in Russia may have been replaced in order to get Prigozhin to back down. Have any top military officials, like the defense minister, been ousted as far as the U.S. knows?
We haven't seen that yet, but again, I think we'll see this unroll further in the days and weeks ahead. There's no secret to the fact that Prigozhin was very much a critic of the military leadership, the Minister of Defense, the head of the armed forces. So how this now unfolds in terms of personnel, all of that remains to be seen. We are intensely focused on Ukraine and making sure that Ukraine continues to have what it needs to defend itself, to take back the territory that the Russians have seized over the past 16 months. And we're very focused on maintaining the unity of purpose and action that has been a hallmark of Ukraine's success to date. The President brought together not only the National Security Cabinet yesterday, but brought together leaders from among our key allies and partners. He instructed the rest of us to fan out, to engage all of our allies and partners, to make sure we were closely coordinating and keeping the focus where it needs to be, on Ukraine, on the efforts that they're making to take back the territory that Russia's taken from them.
I understand that, but just staying on Vladimir Putin for a minute, do you believe that this is the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin?
I don't want to speculate about that. This is, first of all, an internal matter for Russia. What we've seen is this, though. We've seen this aggression against Ukraine become a strategic failure across the board. Russia is weaker economically, militarily. Its standing around the world has plummeted. It's managed to get Europeans off of Russian energy. It's managed to unite and strengthen NATO with new members and a stronger alliance. It's managed to alienate from Russia and unite together Ukraine in ways that it's never been before. This is just an added chapter to a very, very bad book that Putin has written for Russia. But what's so striking about it is it's internal. The fact that you have from within someone directly questioning Putin's authority, directly questioning the premises that upon which he launched this aggression against Ukraine, that in and of itself is something very, very powerful. It adds cracks. Where those go, when they get there, too soon to say, but it clearly raises new questions that Putin has to deal with.
You talked about Ukraine, of course. Ukraine did launch simultaneous counteroffensives against several Russian fronts while all of this was happening.
So yeah, there's Dana Bash's questions, which, like I said, were more like a direct exam. I don't know if they were softball questions, but definitely more open-ended. Not a lot of follow-up, not a lot, and didn't really get a lot beyond his talking points, which I think that CBS News' Face the Nation and Margaret Brennan did a better job of that, asking some more unexpected questions that I think put Secretary Antony Blinken a little more off balance. You'll see that she asks him, who are they in contact with in the Russian government, which he doesn't really answer. And then if the U.S. is prepared for further unrest and the fall of Putin, and what about the nuclear weapons? And she actually follows up on that. And then even if the Wagner Group fighters are going to return to Ukraine, which is an important question. So yeah, I think this is the better cross-examination I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Can you tell us who in the Biden administration has been in touch with Russian leadership?
Well, I instructed my own team at the president's behest to engage with the Russians, first and foremost, to make sure that they understood their responsibilities in terms of protecting our own personnel, ensuring their safety, and well-being, as well as any American citizens in Russia. So a number of people have engaged to make sure that the Russians got that message.
Is the U.S. ready for further unrest in Russia and the scenario that Vladimir Putin does not remain in power?
Margaret, this is an unfolding story, and I think we're in the midst of a moving picture. We haven't seen the last act. We're watching it very closely and carefully. But just step back for a second and put this in context. 16 months ago, Russian forces were on the doorstep of Kiev in Ukraine, thinking they'd take the city in a matter of days, thinking they would erase Ukraine from the map as an independent country. Now, over this weekend, they've had to defend Moscow, Russia's capital, against mercenaries of Putin's own making. Prigozhin himself, in this entire incident, has raised profound questions about the very premises for Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the first place, saying that Ukraine or NATO did not pose a threat to Russia, which is part of Putin's narrative, and it was a direct challenge to Putin's authority. So this raises profound questions. It shows real cracks. We can't speculate or know exactly where that's going to go. We do know that Putin has a lot more to answer for in the weeks and months ahead.
But is the U.S. prepared for the potential of the fall of the Putin government, and is their nuclear stockpile, the largest in the world, secure?
We always prepare for every contingency. In terms of what happens in Russia, it's an internal matter for the Russians to figure out. Of course, when we're dealing with a major power, and especially a major power that has nuclear weapons, that's something that's of concern, something we're very focused on. We haven't seen any change in Russia's nuclear posture. There hasn't been any change in ours, but it's something we're going to watch very, very carefully.
Vladimir Putin is appearing on television this morning, but it appears to have been pre-recorded. Do you know the whereabouts of Vladimir Putin right now? Is he in Moscow?
I don't want to speculate on that or what information that we have. Again, we're watching that carefully. I think one of the things this tells you is that we still don't have finality in terms of what was actually agreed between Prigozhin and Putin. I suspect that we're going to learn more in the days and weeks ahead about what deal they struck. The president brought together not only the National Security Cabinet yesterday, he brought together the leaders of our key allies and partners. He instructed all of us to do the same. We have tremendous unity of purpose and unity of action when it comes to supporting Ukraine, and that's where our focus is.
But as you just said, Prigozhin drew into question the very premise for Vladimir Putin's war. So
that's right.
Do the Wagner fighters return to the fight in Ukraine? Do we know?
Too soon to tell what's going to happen to the Wagner forces, whether they go back to the fight. I mean, it was extraordinary that they were moving out of Ukraine and into Russia. But it's too soon to tell whether they're going to go back into the fight as Wagner, whether they get integrated into regular Russian forces, what this means for Wagner in other parts of the world. I mean, keep in mind, both Putin and Prigozhin are responsible for committing terrible acts in Ukraine against Ukrainian civilians, but also, in the case of Wagner, in country after country in Africa, wherever Wagner is, death and destruction and exploitation follow. But all of this is likely to unroll in the coming days and the coming weeks, to the extent that it presents a real distraction for Putin and for Russian authorities, that they have to look at sort of mind their rear even as they're trying to deal with the counteroffensive in Ukraine. I think that creates even greater openings for the Ukrainians to do well on the ground.
Okay, well, I'm glad the Russians have to mind their rear. I mean, is that really going to happen? I don't know if this is going to have any ongoing effect on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or, I mean, at least for the morale of the troops, and who knows what's going to happen with the Wagner Group forces. But I did think that was the better interview. I think Margaret Brennan did get a bunch of the talking points that I heard from Anthony Blinken on all four of the shows he was interviewed on, but I think Margaret Brennan asked like the most questions that he wasn't prepared for, that got like non-talking point information. But you can let me know what you think. now I'm going to show you, I would show you like 3 Republicans in addition to Anthony Blinken, but Fox News Sunday, they had a Republican on, they had Mike Pence on for this exclusive interview with Shannon Bream, and Shannon Bream never asked him one question about this whole Wagner Group mutiny and destabilization of Russia, and didn't ask Mike Pence one question about that. Maybe the interview was recorded too early for him, for her to ask him that, which in itself is kind of sloppy journalism to hold on to an interview for that long, and I mean, that makes it stale, not really news. But Shannon Bream did ask Ben Cardin about it, the senator from who's on the Foreign Relations Committee, I think. And Ben Cardin did defend the Biden administration position, and because Shannon Bream first asked the question about, should we be worried about instability in a country with thousands of nuclear weapons, which kind of backs up what I was saying about the Fox News Sunday news summary that was all about, like, promoting instability and chaos because maybe that'll hurt Biden. But then Shannon Bream quotes something from the Wall Street Journal without mentioning that the Wall Street Journal is also owned by the same company as Fox News, and talking about Biden actually being too slow. There's like 2 competing Republican talking points on this. Biden was too slow to give them all the weapons they need in the Ukraine, and that's why that's the Wall Street Journal says that's why Ukraine can't take advantage of this moment. But then there are a bunch of people who are like worried that we're giving too much aid to Ukraine. It's actually Republican primary voters think that, a majority of them do, which they're almost trying to hide on Fox News. You'll see Shannon Bream say that the concerns about Ukraine aid are taxpayer concerns, not like, right, I guess Tucker Carlson was like the main leader of the Putin wing of the Republican Party that was on Fox News, and he's been fired, so maybe that's why they're trying to cover it up. But anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after you watch Shannon Bream do the cross-examination sort of Ben Cardin that she didn't do for Mike Pence on Fox News Sunday yesterday, together over here.
So how concerned are you at this moment? What does this say about Putin's hold on power? There's instability in a country that has thousands of nuclear warheads.
Well, Putin brought this upon himself, doing business with the Wagner Group. We know what they are. They're thugs dealing with thugs. So this was not unexpected that a problem would develop. He's lost, that's Putin's lost his credibility with his own people. His account of why he went into Ukraine is now being challenged, I think, with public opinion in Russia itself. We recognize that we have to be very careful in regards to the nuclear capacity of Russia. There's been no signs to date that they've made any movement in that direction.
So the Wall Street Journal just has a piece out the editorial board this morning saying this moment would seem ripe for Ukraine to accelerate its summer offensive and retake more of its territory from the invaders. If only the U.S. had provided more advanced weapons sooner, Ukraine would be better positioned to do so. Have we failed on that front?
The United States has provided an incredible amount of military equipment to the Ukrainians, I think $75 billion to date. We've organized the international community, provided a great deal of assistance. Can we do more? Should we do more? Absolutely. This is a critical time for Ukraine. This counteroffensive is going to be defining as to where we're going to be in the next year or two. So it's incredibly important that we maintain our support and not be fooled by what's happening in Russia today as to the needs of the Ukrainians.
I know you've been supportive, as you said, of continuing that aid as this drags on now 16, 18 months into this. The Reagan Institute has a brand new summer survey out, and they asked people, while a slim majority does support continuing U.S. aid, those who have concerns or who are opposed about the aid going over there say this. They're worried about unmet domestic needs here in the U.S. They're worried about risking provoking Russia even further, corruption in Ukraine, depleting U.S. weapons stockpiles. What's your case to the American taxpayers who have those concerns?
Ukraine's the front line for protection of our democracy. We know that Mr. Putin would not stop with Ukraine. He would continue his efforts in Europe, and we're not safe. So this is our front line in protection of our democracy. This is an investment in America. So, yes, we have to deal with our domestic needs, but we have to also protect our national security, and we need to be part of helping Ukraine defend itself.
So Russia has been saying.
So yeah, there's Shannon Bream sort of cross-examining Ben Cardin. I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, how Shannon Bream was promoting the instability and danger of what's going on so that maybe they can blame Biden. And then you saw that last part where, taxpayers want to know if this aid is actually helping. And then in the middle, the Wall Street Journal, which is basically the same company as Fox News, criticizing Biden for not giving Ukraine enough to seize this particular moment, which, I mean, the real thing that Fox News is hiding is that a majority of Republican primary voters oppose aid to Ukraine. You'll see that in an NBC poll in this next clip, where Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press does a better job of cross-examining Don Bacon, a Republican who actually is in a district that Biden won. He's one of the few people who's criticized Trump because of that. But and you'll see Chuck Todd doesn't do any follow-up questions after talking to Don Bacon here because he wants to move on to the Trump indictment. But even though I'm using this to emphasize my criticism of the Fox News Sunday clip we just watched, I also kind of have a criticism for Chuck Todd's original question. I don't know, is this like corporate news media bias where they're always in favor of military spending? I mean, I know there are people who are like anti-war and oppose U.S. aid to Ukraine to fight the Russian invasion, and people on the right and the left, but especially a majority of Republican primary voters. And I mean, I have some sympathy for anti-war sentiment, although in general, I think this particular expenditure, as you'll see Don Bacon say in this next clip, and Chuck Todd emphasizes it, with 5% of with 3% of our military spending, we have depleted 50% of Russia's military budget, which, I mean, Russia's almost like a third world country. Its economy is pretty small, so that's not such a great accomplishment. And Chuck Todd, like I said, the question he asks here, he starts off talking about the poll showing Republican primary voters don't support Ukraine aid. And then he says, and that aid just caused the crack in this Russian leadership. First of all, you can say that that's why. I mean, it's really more the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military, because we didn't give them that much aid to begin with, and they're the ones who held off Russia when they were supposed to take over Kiev in 3 days. But it's not just that, it's the idea that this crack in Russian leadership is good, because, I mean, what if, just think if Prigozhin actually was instituting a coup and took over Russia from Putin. Is Prigozhin better than Putin? I mean, Putin is bad, but I mean, Prigozhin, this dude is the leader of these mercenaries who are responsible for war crimes in Syria and Africa. I think they covered some of that in the news summaries we watched. So, I mean, why is it even a good thing that that all this U.S. aid might have put cracks in Putin's leadership so that he might be replaced by someone even worse? I mean, there's a lot of assumptions in Chuck Todd's questioning here that make it, even though it emphasizes the Fox News bias in the previous clip, it's not really the greatest questioning, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
I want to pop up something from our poll here, just so you know. We asked whether you would be more likely or less likely to support a candidate who wants to more funding for the war in Ukraine. It's pretty evenly divided overall, but among Republicans, it's 2-1, less likely. Republican primary voters, a majority of them, I know you said it's a minority in the Republican Party, but a majority of Republican primary voters say they're less likely to support a candidate who wants to help with, wants to continue to fund this war in Ukraine. Do you see the funding of the war in Ukraine as directly responsible for this crack in Russia with Putin?
Yes, I do. I think our actions have helped Ukraine prevail to the extent that they are right now. It's still, they're in the middle of a war. Russia controls about 10% of their country. But without our aid, without our support, I think Ukraine would have fallen by now. And I would just like to point out, we have spent roughly 5% of our military, what we budget for our military, that's what's gone to Ukraine. And it's depleted roughly half of Russia's army.
So you see this as a good investment. 5% of our military budget depletes 50% of theirs?
Yes, that's what we've done in the last year and a half. And I think this is weakened Russia for, maybe a decade to come, which is good for the Baltic countries. It's good for Poland. And it would be different if Putin was wanting to be a peaceful neighbor, but he's not. So we see the barbaric, basically what he's doing is it's might makes right. And that's not what we want with a major nuclear country. And so I think we have a moral obligation to stand up here and help Ukraine. I think too many Republicans have tried to stay under the radar on this. We do best when we stand for what's right, what's truthful. And I believe in Ronald Reagan's principles of strength. Well, we get peace through strength.
Right.
And you got to stand up and help out the little guy that's being beat up by the big guy.
I want to get your response to something former President Trump said last night about the indictment. Let me play.
Yeah, you can see there that he then moves on to the indictment, not really following up. And I don't know, did it seem like Chuck Todd was an advocate for the U.S. military-industrial complex in that questioning of Representative Don Bacon? I mean, in some ways, it seems that he assumed, like I said before, I showed the clip, that and it was 5%. The argument is 5% of our military budget depleted 50% of Russia's military, which is kind of a specious argument because, like I said, it's more the people of Ukraine and the Ukrainian military, and we came in afterwards to prop that up after we had forecast their demise, I guess. And I don't even know if it's good. Like I said before, I showed the clip that Putin is in danger of being replaced by someone worse than Putin. But anyway, the other way I wanted to criticize the previous clip, the Fox News Sunday clip, where they only asked Ben Cardin about the situation in Russia and this mutiny from the Wagner Group, did not ask Mike Pence, even though there was this long, 8-minute interview of Mike Pence on Fox News Sunday was mostly about abortion, honestly. And later Shannon Bream cross-examined Ben Cardin about abortion. But what they didn't do was cross-examine Mike Pence about Russia and support for Ukraine and what happened in Russia over the weekend. But I think it might be because a majority of Republican primary voters are actually against aid to Ukraine, and it would have been divisive for Mike Pence to have to speak on that. But in contrast to that, Jon Karl over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos actually did get one of the newest entrants into the Republican presidential field, Will Hurd from Texas, former CIA agent and member of Congress who retired from Congress. And you'll see here, Jon Karl first asks him, what he think, what are his feelings and what has he heard based on being a former CIA agent, but then actually gets him to attack Biden, but also attack other Republican candidates, which is what Fox News should have done. They should have gotten Mike Pence to attack other Republican candidates on being too weak on Ukraine, and that's what Will Hurd does in this final newsmaker clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
You are a veteran of the CIA. You know Russia really well, so I want to start there. What is your sense of what is happening on the ground and what you heard from Secretary Blinken?
Well, first and foremost, one of the things that's most disappointing to me is that the only thing we've been hearing out of the Biden administration, the Biden White House, is that we're actively monitoring. There's another word for that. That's wringing your hands and doing nothing. And when there is uncertainty, look, when there's uncertainty and chaos, that's actually an opportunity. That's actually an opportunity for us to double down on our friends. We had intelligence reports that suggest that this was going forward. We should have been planning with our allies. We should have been planning with the Ukrainians on how to take advantage of this opportunity. We should be supporting the Ukrainians more. I think that even goes as far as doing a no-fly zone and helping them enforce that, a no-fly zone. And what we've also learned, and the thing that I get frustrated, is old-fashioned concept of escalation. The Biden administration is always talking about we can't do something or we can't help our allies because we're going to escalate. What did Vladimir Putin do when he had somebody barreling down the highway to come to Moscow? He didn't escalate.
He backed down.
He capitulated. Yeah. And so we should learn from that. And look, it's not just Joe Biden. It's unfortunate the two leading Republican nominees for president, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, policy on Ukraine is wrong. I wish they would stop fighting with American companies like Disney and be more interested in supporting our allies against attacks against democracy. And this is important. And one of the things that I was concerned that Secretary Blinken said, he said, help the Ukrainians take back land that they lost in the last 16 months. How about we take back land that they lost since 2014? We should be making sure that we're supporting Ukraine and pushing the Russians out of Crimea, out of the Donbass. And I hope that was just him misspeaking and that the official policy is not just going back to the way things were when the Russians most recently invaded 16 months ago.
But to be clear, you're not saying that we should have in any way aided the effort to Prigozhin in this effort. I mean, he's in many ways worse than Putin, right?
Look, Prigozhin is a thug. Yeah. He was upset that Vladimir Putin is not being nasty enough in Ukraine. So it's not supporting him. It's supporting the Ukrainians in their counteroffensive.
Taking advantage of the chaos.
Making sure our allies, our NATO allies, are helping with advanced weaponry that are going and moving into Ukraine in order for them to push the Russians out of all of Ukraine, not just the last 16 months.
Okay, so let me ask you about your campaign. I mean,
Yeah, and there you see Will Hurd joining the presidential campaign, not going for the majority of Republican primary voters who don't want to support someone in favor of aid to Ukraine. He's like a Ukraine hawk. He's attacking Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis for having the wrong position on Ukraine. That's my one criticism of Jonathan Karl there. How is Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis wrong on Ukraine? That would have been an important follow-up question. The most important thing Will Hurd could do is expand on his criticism of the two Republican frontrunners. But there it looks like Will Hurd, former CIA agent, is the candidate of the military-industrial complex. Like Biden, Trump, DeSantis, all too soft on giving maximum aid to Ukraine. What? Just roll back to where we were before the Russian invasion? No, we have to go back to 2014. We have to liberate Crimea before we can end this war, which, I mean, that would be nice, and who knows, might even happen, but there's a large cost to it, and I don't know if it's, with the events of this last weekend, it seems more reasonable than it did a few days ago. So anyway, you can let me know what you think in the comments section. That's the last of my news clips for you. I hope you appreciate all the time and effort I put into watching the news shows and the rest of the media and picking out my 11 clips and adding my media criticism and political commentary like I do every Monday. It takes me like 8, 10, 12 hours sometimes to put together this show. So if you want to support that, you can give me a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to my channel. When you subscribe, you can also, there's like a little bell that on the subscription button that you can click on to make sure you get notifications every week of my videos. And also right under the video, the first couple links are ways to support my channel financially through a monthly Patreon subscription where you can become a patron, or a one-time PayPal contribution. I got one of those one-time PayPal contributions after last week's show, so I appreciate that. That gave me a smile when that happened. So thank you, all of you who showed up for the live show. Even though it was a little quiet in the live comments this week, I did still read through what you were saying, and I appreciate your input. And recorded show viewers, you can let me know what you think about the program. I will be back next Monday and every Monday all the way through January 2025, no matter how many people show up, no matter how many people contribute. It's a commitment I've made, and I think that's probably when I'm going to end the live streams, but it's still over a year away, and until next Monday, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.